Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
All across the fantasy universe, welcome in everybody to week 7 of the Fantasy Football Hustle. I'm your host, Brian Drake, fightingchancefantasy.com, joined as always by the analytical assassins, Dwain McFarland, senior fantasy analyst at pff.com. How's week 7 treating you, man? We've got like every team and their brother on bye week. It's Bye-Mageddon. I mean, any name you want to come up with. It's going to be wild in these streets overnight tonight.
I will say, because Tuesday I start doing the rankings, and so I was working on them earlier today before the pod with Ian, and which will drop tomorrow morning. And we do the matchup show, right, where we do the preview of this week. And man, I honestly don't remember a week. I'm sure there's been one in the past, but I don't remember one where I'm doing the running backs and I'm like, really? I'm going to have Darrell Williams in my top 12?
Oh yeah.
I'm like, well, Zeke's out, Dalvin Cook's out. J-Rob's out, Eckler's gone, Najee Harris is gone. I mean, quickly adds up. I mean, the same thing at receiver. A lot of those teams have 2 receivers. Dallas, you're going to be without Cooper. You're going to be without CeeDee Lamb. Then you got Minnesota without Justin Jefferson and Thielen. Yeah, so I mean, it's a big bye week, man. So it's kind of interesting looking at some of the names creeping up the board, and I have to keep I've done a double take multiple times, being like, wow, how can they be in my top 36? And well, it's just because of the buys.
Yeah, don't forget the people who are going to get let down once again from Laviska Shenault. They're without that this week, getting deprived of Shenault.
Man, I had something positive to say about Laviska Shenault this week.
Oh, man.
We can get to that later. I don't want to break your heart.
And, of course, we're sponsored by our good friends, powered by our good friends at Pro Football Focus. Head over to pff.com. Use our promo code HUSTLE. You're going to get 25% off any subscription at pff.com. It's going to open up the rankings, the locked articles, Dwayne's utilization report. And if you guys haven't figured out over the past 4 years, that's kind of what this show is. It's kind of the Dwayne's utilization report come to life. So if you're looking for just a waiver show, he does one of those with Ian Hartitz. You can find it, the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And if you want just that, if you want his matchups, he does that later in the week. But right here, this is kind of the meat and potatoes utilization report, just talking some good old fantasy. And with 6 teams off this week, throwing injuries, Dwayne, to both Browns running backs, a possible shakeup in Seattle, and Lord knows who's going to pop up next in the Ravens offense. I'd say we've got some ground to cover, my friend.
Yeah, man, let's fire away. And we'll get some questions out of the chat room too.
Yeah, we really appreciate everybody in the chat on YouTube. Make sure, please, leave a comment, like, subscribe, however that good stuff works. So in Cleveland, let's start there. That's where everybody wants to know what's going on. We're both Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are set to miss Thursday night's contest against the Broncos. So this leaves fantasy owners, Dwayne, in a bind, because not only are you down 2 top 15 PPR backs, but throw in the buys, and it leaves a lot of benches pretty thin. Enter the Browns' next man up to Ernest Johnson. Here's the tricky part, though. Johnson's going to be heavily sought after on the wire because so many people just need a body, right? But he's likely a 1-week rental. So our dilemma, Dwayne, how much are we spending in fab on a guy who might give us just 1 week's worth of work? And then there's this Demetric Felton guy who's basically a wide receiver that's called a running back on most sites, and he's kind of in the mix. So what are you doing with this Cleveland situation? Oh, and by the way, everybody, cheers.
Yeah. It is going to be, Ernest Johnson. I mean, I fully expect him to handle, 60 to 70% of the rushing attempts, maybe 80%. I don't think Demetric Felton will really be that involved. I do think he'll get a few carries, but I don't think he'll do anything near, I don't expect us to see Ernest Johnson just taking over Chubb's role and Felton taking over Hunt's role. I think Felton will take over some components of Hunt's role, but not that many of them. He's only lined up in the backfield 2 times. Yes, he's lined up back there a few more times than that, but then he ghost motioned out. So all I really care is how often was he actually in the backfield and potentially there to take, a rushing attempt. And that's not something that the Browns seem super interested in doing. So I do think they'll use him kind of like a satellite player. But I don't know that he'll be super usable in fantasy. I think it's a complete guess. I think Ernest Johnson is really the only player he can use. I agree with your sentiment that it really is more of a 1 week rental. Now we could maybe Chubb's injury lingers too. I hope not. But if it were to linger, another week, you could be getting 2 weeks. They could also really use Ernest Johnson to play a little bit more, of the Kareem Hunt role. He wouldn't really take on probably that much of the passing work, maybe some of it, but he might just be enough to, give Nick Chubb, some relief, maybe keep Chubb around 65% of the carries instead of 80%. They could do something like that, which means Johnson could carry a little value. It won't be anything like what you were getting out of Hunt. So I always try to think through what are the ranges, right, of outcomes on the player that you're picking up. But I do believe you're spot on that most likely it's a 1 week type thing. And say worst case, Chubb, hurts something in practice, and you get an extra week or two out of him. At some point, we're going to have Chubb or Hunt back, right? And at some point, you're going to have both of them back. So I don't think it's going to be super long term. But from that, you've got to really decide for your own team, because I know it's going to be a weird week because there's so many buys. It's going to drive up, the fab dollars. But for me, I would do 5 to 10, percent, of my fab. If I felt like, hey, I've got to have this win kind of thing. And maybe I am the Chubb owner. I might go 20%, because then at least he's my insurance policy for Chubb for another week or two, just in case I need it. But if you're not the Chubb, fantasy, manager, I think it makes it a little tougher. You probably, just like you said, have to plan on only using him for 1 week. So, I put 5 to 10%, in the utilization report, but I understand some people go a little bit over that. And I do expect multiple leagues for him to go higher than that just because of the bye weeks.
If you want to get sneaky out here, folks, and it's tough to do because trading for injured players can sometimes blow up in your face. But in the case of Nick Chubb, it might be viable. So we're likely not going to see Hunt for another 3 weeks after this Thursday night affair against Denver. So Chubb, Dwain, could really see a larger passing game role without Hunt for 3 weeks. And if you could get a healthy Nick Chubb for 3 weeks with that role, that's top. He's already top 5. That's like top 3 RB potential. So if it's me, I might not be so inclined to go out and throw an offer to Nick Chubb owner. He can't use him this week anyways. There's a million buys. If you got a little depth, who knows? You might be able to buy Nick Chubb on the cheap.
Yeah, Chubb's going to be, like you said, projected as a top 3 to 4 back, top 6 for sure, pretty much every week that Kareem Hunt's out, and he's going to have RB1 overall upside. To me, he's the next best thing there is in football, really, to Derrick Henry. As far as breaking the long runs, very physical. He's the best pure rusher really in the NFL. It's hard to take anything away from Derrick Henry, but they're both right there. So yeah, I would expect, I don't know that he'll get all of the 2-minute work and long down and distance work and all that, but I think he'll definitely get up over 60% of the routes, which is really all that will be enough for him to put him into the top 6 conversation every single week. And he'll probably finish, in the top 2, maybe even, have a couple of first place finishes, and we could have Hunt out longer than that.
Yeah,
we don't know for sure with Hunt, so we'll have to wait and see, what the reports on him look like. But if you end up with Chubb, as your starter for say 4, 5, 6 weeks, now you're talking about getting yourself into your fantasy, playoffs, potentially through a playoff win, that sort of thing.
We were talking in my my fantasy group chat with my buddies, and I'll raise the price because I only said 100 in the chat. But let me throw out to you and the guys who are listening, driving around right now. If you were offered $500 to tackle Derrick Henry, because Nick Chubb's very Derrick Henry-like. So look at Nick Chubb or Derrick Henry.
You're way too low
a free
on this
safety.
offer.
These guys are running directly at you, and you have to tackle them to the ground. For $500, are you doing it?
No.
Could you do it?
No, I couldn't do it, and I wouldn't do it. And $500 is way too low to tackle Derrick Henry head on or Nick Chubb. That's way too low. We're talking I'm probably going to have some sort of a neck injury, a concussion, definitely probably a broken collarbone. My medical bills are going to be far more than $500. Yeah, Vincent's right. He's no chance I'd even think about it for $500. You're going to have to bump that up to $10,000. And even then, I'm not sure I need, not to say that I wouldn't always want $10,000, but man, I think how scared you would be. That's like stepping in an octagon, with some professional MMA fighter. That's what I equate this to. If I have to stand there and let Derrick Henry run straight into me,
It's like they always used to have that line, like, would you let Mike Tyson punch you for $1 million? And it's like, I'm going to lose half my teeth and, break my jaw. Like, no, I'm not doing that.
Brain damage. You're for sure going to be lights out,
Oh, man. I could have such a segue from brain damage to Odell Beckham here, but I'll just keep it the way I wrote it here. So while we're in Cleveland, we saw Donovan Peoples-Jones pop off for a big game. Largely that's thanks to a Hail Mary at the end of the first half. So I can't in good faith tell any of our listeners, hey, you want to go pick up Donovan Peoples-Jones off the wire. I'm sure you'll see that some places just because people kind of just follow the box score, but we're going to see Jarvis Landry return. And as you note in the utilization report, OBJ is still commanding a massive target share. So I don't know, is he a trade for guy? Talk people off the ledge with Beckham? I mean, he left the game with an injury. Baker's all jacked up. So, I mean, we're going a million different ways here in Cleveland.
Yeah, number one, I don't know that it's really much of a fall off from Baker Mayfield to Case Keenum, to be honest. Like, I'm just not a big Baker Mayfield fan. There are things he does. I think he's fine to operate this offense. But I just haven't been impressed with Baker since his rookie season. But with Beckham Jr., I mean, look, things look good. I put out a buy low on him last week. So of course, he injures his shoulder, but from a utilization perspective, like everything was going right, in that game. His routes had jumped from 85 to 89% in weeks 4 and 5. He only was able to play 58% of the routes this past week. But his targets were 27%, targets per route run, 35%. So this is really the first game script, though, where the Browns have actually had to play from behind. And that was actually part of my buy low reasoning is, look, we've really seen the Browns only in this one type of game script. As good as we may think they are, we know that over a 17-game season, they're not only going to play this one type of game. So, I mean, they had to pass on 68%, of their plays in week 6. I mean, they trailed the Cardinals by 4 points or more on 93%, of their plays. So, I mean, those type of things are going to happen. And when it did, like, surprise, surprise, like Beckham Jr. is really where they were going. Now we got to see what's going to happen with his shoulder. So yeah, I like Beckham Jr. I still have faith in him and the teams, that I have him on, but anytime like an injury enters the equation and I don't have all the information really yet on what's going to be the deal with his shoulder, I've got to wait and hear more. But if I were to hear that they thought everything was great with the shoulder, yeah, I still feel good about Beckham Jr. I know people are worried about Jarvis Landry. I expect Jarvis Landry to really cut more into the tight ends and the targets that they've been getting. They operate really more in similar areas of the field. And then I think you'll see the tight ends used more as the seam stretcher once you get Landry back working from the outside in, in that intermediate underneath short type area. He's really the Z receiver. And then Beckham is more the X, and he's going to operate at all levels of the field, which is really what we've seen. So look, Beckham Jr. is not like 35. He's 28. I know he's dealt with injuries, but I still have faith in him. And I look at the utilization is what I look at. And I mean, I just kind of follow that, Drake. And that's still telling me that Beckham is better than what public sentiment believes about him. I mean, people are really down on him. That was the other part of my kind of, thesis on Beckham last week was, look, sentiment is so bad around him. You can get him for basically nothing in a trade. I'm not saying go pony up a bunch of assets to get Odell Beckham Jr. Really, it was, look, he can be your wide receiver 3. And he could give you some Debo type weeks, in this offense.
I love it. In our chat room, people are just going off and they're firing trades left and right. Now we love to see it, and we'll get to some of those. Don't worry about it, guys. And
yeah, it's gotten to where people don't need us. We just need to let this chat room work.
Yeah, the chat room surely holds court in there. And if you're listening to this, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we thank you. And a lot of you got back to us and where you listen to the show, tweeted us at FF Hustle, and we love that. But yeah, the chat room's a place to be if you can ever hang out with us on a Tuesday night at 10 o'clock. So Jared Patterson is going to be another hot name on the waiver wire as Antonio Gibson went down with this lingering shin issue. Patterson's someone who could see a bump between the tackles, but here's me. I don't know if they don't lean more on J.D. McKissick, who is somehow incredibly only owned in 43% of Yahoo leagues. He bulked up a little over the offseason, and let's be honest, this team sucks, okay? So J.D. McKissick this past week had 8 rushing attempts for 45 yards, 10 targets, caught 8 of them for 65. That's awesome. That's kind of what he was doing last year. In a half point PPR, it's 15 points, okay? So I get the Jarrett Patterson ad, and, here's my thought on the Washington football team. They're going to be playing from behind likely this week against Green Bay. Next week, they get Denver, who's top 4 in rushing yards against for running backs. Then they have a bye. Then they play Tampa right after the bye, who you can't run on at all. So I don't see Jarrett Patterson giving you kind of like league winning upside here. But again, if Gibson goes down, I guess they need someone to run the rock. But I think they're going to lean a lot on McKissick, man.
I mean, I think they could. Like, we don't know for sure, to be honest. Like, that's why it was hard for me, to get too behind Patterson. I'm hoping people picked up Patterson in the last 2 weeks, because really he's been one of the preemptive pickups we've talked about, just with Gibson having the injury. And I know we heard the chat, oh, it's just a pain management thing. You don't ever want a stress fracture in your lead back. Like, no. It's not good. The bells go off. It's like, okay, who could be the other potential backup, that could get some carries. I do agree that game scripts are going to matter. I do agree that McKissick probably gets more than what he's been seeing. And we saw it last week, once you had, Gibson leave the game, you had the football team already down, and they did pretty much just go with McKissick. It wasn't Jarrett Patterson that was really out there. And McKissick has been the person handling the 2-minute, offense. He's been handling the long down and distance. So we know he'll keep those things. My guess is McKissick will be probably 20 to 30% of, the rushing attempts. He's sitting at 18% on the season. He had 42% last week. And I think you'll see 50 to 60% of the rushing attempts go to Patterson, and you'll still see McKissick really get most of the passing down work. And to your point, it could just be 12 rushing attempts on the whole game that we're talking about trying to give 60 to 70% of to Patterson because Washington is behind all the time. Now, their defense has been playing, a little bit better. So we'll see. I know it didn't necessarily show last week, with the Chiefs, but some of the underlying metrics look a tad better. Not anywhere near what we thought this defense would be. It's been, just terrible compared to what our expectations were. But with Patterson, I don't mind. I would put more on Patterson if you're still, considering if you've still got waivers to run, just because we know this could be a long-term issue for the rest of the season for Gibson, right? Which just opens up. And if that's the case, I don't think they really want to pound McKissick for the rest of the season. If McKissick's got to handle this kind of role, to your point, like for a couple of games, and then they think Gibson, is going to be back, that's one thing. But if it's something where we could see Gibson miss multiple games, or they end up having to shut him down, or they're just like, you know what, why do we want to keep risking him? Our team sucks. And maybe he could play, but they're in a situation where let's just not play him because, we're not going anywhere. So I do think Patterson, is a 10 to 25%er at this point, just because you've got the lead back with an injury, and he's for sure, he's part of the equation. It's him and McKissick. And I think it will be a committee between the two.
Yeah, I'm just looking here. I saw, there's a lot of doctors on Twitter now in terms of fantasy, and there was a guy talking about, they had this MRI yesterday, so they haven't released the info. So it could be something along the lines of they're looking for a second opinion, and maybe he's going to miss a few weeks. So we'll see what happens.
What I read earlier today, or the day before, I read about it on Monday, was just that recovery time on it is typically 3 months. Oof. So it's not like they can just, if they really want to rest it enough to let it heal, that's the recovery time. Now they could manage it, and maybe they give him a couple of weeks off just to get him to a point where they can manage it. But here's my thought on that, Drake. Let's say they decide, okay, we're going to kind of rest him the next 2 to 3 weeks. Say Washington doesn't win a game in those 3 games. Why are you going to put Gibson back out there at that point? Just let him heal. Yeah. Now again, we can't assume any kind of rational coaching or any kind of decisions. These coaches, look, man, I think we give them, they're smarter than we think about on-field, their the tactics and, getting the team ready and all those things. They do a lot. We bang on coaches a lot of times, and there's so much that goes into it. They have to be like master time managers. But when it comes to these injuries and stuff, sometimes I feel like they're guessing just as much as us. It's like Pete Carroll. He's like, we'll see with Chris Carson. I mean, it seems like you'd have enough of a medical opinion. You freaking already would have had Chris Carson on the IR like a week ago, a week ahead of when they did it. So we hear these sort of things all the time where we're going to hold out hope. Oh, no, we're going to put him. Christian McCaffrey. Really? I mean, come on. It's
Joe Mixon last year.
Yeah, exactly. So you see these sorts of things all the time. Where sometimes I think they're kind of just almost as much, in the dark, or they're not quite sure, what to do. And, they're getting certain medical advice. They have the best doctors, that money can buy, you would think. But it's funny how often they say it's going to be one way, and I don't get it. Then 2 weeks later, it's like, no, we're going to put them on IR. It's like, well, Why do you want to wait, the 2 weeks? I don't know. Seems like they would have good enough medical advice to make a call. And why rush Christian McCaffrey back? Like, why, why didn't they just go ahead and just give him the full 3 to 4 weeks off, and they'd be like a week away from being done with it instead of like trying to push him through practice?
He definitely had a setback. That's, because
he shouldn't have been practicing. Like,
no,
just, if it's a certain grade hamstring injury, I'm not a doctor, but it's like, just don't play him. Like, don't practice him. Just let him sit.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on a podcast. Good question in our chat room here about some guys that might be on your waiver wire from our buddy Rob Fisher. I love his avatar from the league also. Ramondre Stevenson or Jarrett Patterson as a pickup for the week.
I would go Patterson just because I think there's more long-term upside. I think Ramondre Stevenson is going to be, you're going to have Damian Harris be half of the Patriots backfield. And then you've got another half of the Patriots backfield to split. And you've got Brandon Bolden handling all the passing down work. And then you've got Ramondre Stevenson basically playing the Rex Burkhead role minus, some of the receiving duties that Burkhead had. Ramondre Stevenson, the thing that scares me, Drake, is they don't trust him. And you even heard Romo talking about it on the broadcast this Sunday. They don't put him out there in long down and distance. They don't put him out there in the 2-minute offense. They don't want him on the field inside the 5. He had to go out there. And this was after a fumble because Damian Harris, waved himself off, and they had to put Stevenson in. So
that happens so much in fantasy. Like in the NFL in real games, like we'll see a guy, he'll run everybody down, to the 1 yard line, and then he taps himself out in the head, and then somebody comes in and they get a garbage touchdown, and you're like, yeah, well, this guy brought me all the way down. Like Leonard Fournette does that all the time, and then like Ronald Jones will score a garbage touchdown. People go, oh, see, Ronald Jones still a thing. No, Ronald Jones is trash, but Leonard Fournette tapped himself out.
Yeah, we do see it a lot. And you notice it if you're a fantasy player more than the average fan.
I watch every move
my friends that don't do fantasy, and they like hear me commenting. They're like, well, why do you care? They're just going to score a touchdown. I'm like, because Tony Pollard's not on my fantasy team. Zeke is. It's like, it's the difference.
Yeah. And with Stevenson, too, if he doesn't score that touchdown, you wonder how much people are really on him. By the way, what a great game for you and your Cowboys. I was live on the air doing the SiriusXM show, which we do from 7 to 9 Eastern. And my counterpart on there, Andrew Erickson, is a Patriots fan. So as you know, I have the fastest TV feed in America, and it's just miles ahead of everyone else. It's like I have a live look in. Dwayne and I have had this happen when we're doing stuff, recording different things. But so I'm watching and I see the INT return for a touchdown. And I go, oh no, just turn your TV off, Andrew. And then the next play, you see Kendrick Bourne score on the 80-yarder. So it's off topic. It's not what we were going to talk about, but what do you think of your Cowboys right now?
Yeah, man, I'm excited about them. They were not able to stop the run when they needed to. They're pretty weak in the middle. Leighton Vander Esch, just doesn't seem right. I don't know if he's worried, about, an injury, his neck, his back, what. But he's not like playing downhill. So we have real problems when teams run the ball inside. I mean, if you saw the first drive, the Cowboys went for it inside their own 40, 3 plays, touchdown for the Patriots. They did get better as the game went, and they started, scheming to take the run away. But I do like the secondary. I do like Diggs. Yes, he is big risk, big reward. But mainly, man, it's just the offense, keeping the team in situations to be close or chances, to lead. What I like about the offense is they can do everything, Drake. If a team wants them to run the ball and is inviting them with the too high look and all this kind of stuff, that's going around, it's a copycat league. The Cowboys are one of the teams that can actually say, fine, yeah, we can run it and run every play and get all the way down the field and score a touchdown. Most teams, if you invite them to do that, right, they're eventually going to screw up, or they're not going to be able to get enough yardage, and then you get a punt out of them, or you put them into a long down and distance. Like, the Cowboys are actually good enough to execute on that. But if you want to try to take the run game away, they have multiple weapons. Dak is playing great. The offensive line, like Tyron Smith, is playing the best he has since 5 years ago. Hopefully he stays healthy. He had an MRI on his neck last week. But that was before the game. And the neck is what knocked him out all of last season. So knock on wood, that Tyron Smith is okay. Marcus Steele, who's had to play right tackle for Lail Collins, after his kind of screw up with the drug testing stuff, has played well. So I think at least they know they have him now. You get Lail Collins back after the bye week. I feel good about them, man. I mean, they're pretty deep on offense, not as deep on defense, but they can be very multiple. They can do everything you need to do. They can win deep. They can win underneath. They've got the run game. So the offense is going to be a challenge. But man, the NFC, well, NFL period, but the NFC is tough. Like you got the Rams, you got the Bucks, you got the Cardinals.
The NFC East is not tough. Let's
no, the NFC East is not. But like they've
already clinched.
There are multiple really good teams in the NFC to deal with. I mean, I still haven't even named, the Packers and some of these other teams. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting for sure.
Mm-hmm. Let's stick in the NFC East. And we were just talking about the Washington football team. If you need a tight end this week, there's a name you got to know, and it's Ricky Seals-Jones. The guy was on the field for 100% of the football team's snaps. He's widely available, and if you need a tight end, I mean, he's playing the Logan Thomas role. Logan Thomas was having a really nice start to the season, and he's just come in and they target him and they find him in the end zone and he scores. And I mean, it's tight end, folks. We know it's a freaking wasteland. So if Ricky Seals-Jones is out there, put a bid in. I don't advocate for carrying a second tight end, but there's bye weeks and stuff coming up. I wouldn't even be against carrying Ricky Seals-Jones as a backup tight end. Hell, just to block your league mates, make them start some scrub. Dalton Schultz is going to miss time now, or not Dalton Schultz, excuse me, Dawson Knox in Buffalo. He's got a broken hand. So, somebody's going to be looking for Ricky Seals-Jones on the waiver wire. Maybe it's you, and then boom, now you got some instant trade bait.
Yeah, I have Seals-Jones right now in my first pass in my rankings at number 9, this week. So he's in my top 12.
Cheap plug. Anybody who gives us a shout out either for Dwain or for me in the Sirius show automatically gets put on the screen for the YouTube show. All right. So in Seattle, Dwain, there's a lot to talk about. First, let's start with the backfield, where we aren't exactly sure if Alex Collins is going to play Monday night against the Saints. That's the tough part. They play Monday night. So hooray, another island game for Geno Smith. Collins looked great, though, in week 6. 20 rushing attempts for 101 yards and a touchdown. If he can't go, I think he has like a hip or an ass injury. They always say a glute.
It's a glute and a hip. He has both.
So now we're in this quagmire of the returning Rashad Penny and change of pace backs DJ Dallas and Travis Homer handling work. It wouldn't shock me at all if Penny comes out and then gets hurt literally like during the coin toss. But I kind of like, if I'm in a deep PPR league, like DJ Dallas, I think is going to get work.
Yeah, I mean, look, Collins has played great. My concern is this whole thing just turns into a big committee. Penny's shown that, like, if he, and it's to your point, it's rare that he stays healthy, but he's had a few good games, when he's been available and around. And we've also seen him get work in the passing game in the past. So I'm very interested to see, how do they use Penny? Do they let him take over some of that DJ Dallas and some of that, Travis Homer role? Or is it really going to be more, no, you and Alex Collins are going to handle the early down duties? And what's that pecking order going to look like? Really, I think it's anyone's guess if they're all active for Monday night. I think it's going to be basically guessing as to how it's going to turn out. I think if Collins is fully healthy, we have to expect him to lead, right, in carries, because he did look so good. It is good that he gets an extra night, not easy on, roster decisions, because you've got to wait an extra day. So if he's big time questionable heading into Sunday, you're going to have a tough decision on it. But with Penny, from a fab perspective, I'm putting 10 to 25% on him as well, just because, like, the main thing is we just have no clue with Chris Carson. Like, we don't know if he's going to be back in 3 or 4 weeks. We don't know if he's done for the season. And so a lot can happen, meaning Alex Collins could get hurt, and it could just be Rashad Penny's backfield. Rashad Penny could take over more of the passing down role. And there's just not a lot of guys on the wire anymore, Drake. Like, all the running backs have been hurt, and all of their backups have been picked up. Like, it's
everyone
crazy.
is dead.
Yeah. So it's like,
that's the way the story goes. That's the headline.
We're heading into week 7. Now, I hate this offense. Like, no pod over the summer really pumped up like what the potential changes were that we could see right in this offense. And it just hasn't come to fruition. They run the least plays in the league. They're run heavy. It's just bad news, man. It's bad news for Metcalf. It's bad news for Tyler Lockett. Those guys were already living on super thin margins anyway, but Russell Wilson was helping them overcome. Now you don't have Russell Wilson. So what happens? You only run a few passing plays. Guess what you get? You get 205 yards passing. That's what you get.
Oh my
and
God.
Guess what? You're not getting more targets because they're not increasing, the pace of play. So the Seahawks offense looks like something from like 1987. It's terrible.
Have you ever seen, and I'm sure nobody has seen in our chat has watched a Syracuse University football game this year. Go watch them play. It's literally like watching an Army-Navy game right now. They play in a dome. They have every advantage you could possibly have. They have a quarterback that runs or they hand it to their running back. No one else gets the football. That's basically what Seattle has come to now. But the passing game is just dead without Russ. It's a two-man passing game with Lockett and Metcalf, and they're borderline unplayable right now. Last week, Metcalf finished the week as wide receiver 33. Lockett was a very Ronnie the Limo Driver-esque wide receiver 69. Both players' average depth of target is well below their season average. DK Metcalf on the season was averaging 12.1 ADOT. Sunday night, a measly 6.2. Lockett was under 10. His average is usually over 13. Dwayne, Carroll's just looking to take the ball out of Geno Smith's hand. He doesn't want him throwing the football at all.
He didn't want Russ throwing the ball, much less Geno Smith. I mean, look, they're 32nd in plays per game. They're 32nd in time of possession. I mean, this team sucks. They trail the 24th most. I don't know really what to say, about
Should
the
you
Seahawks.
trade these guys? What do you do if you own DK? What do you do if you own Lockett? Asking for a guy who owns Tyler Lockett.
At some point, you just have to play the talent, and you just have to hope that it comes through. But it's definitely not something you're excited about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here's the problem when we make these trade recommendations. I get the DMs about them later, and I'm like, man, they didn't get enough. So you got to make sure if you're gonna sell on a DK Metcalf or a Tyler Lockett, still make sure you bring something good back. I know you listen to this show and you hear us talking about how bad it is, but don't ever dismiss the talent of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. That always still has value. So don't go grab a player that just has good utilization but not good talent to get rid of someone like a DK Metcalf. What you're looking for is to really sell high on the name value, and get someone, you're not going to get as much as you would have gotten for him, right after the draft. And that's okay. You need to be fair in your trades. You want both sides of a trade to win so that you can continue to do business like that. But just make sure that you get enough for him. It's just, looking at the Patriots, not the Patriots. Patriots are terrible over the last 3 games and plays as well. So that's what's in my head. But sorry, the Seahawks, I'm just trying to think of what positive thing can I say? Let's play a game, Drake. What's something positive that you can say right now about the Seattle Seahawks offense? Can you think of one thing?
I was going to say they have a cool stadium. I like their uniforms. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's where it kind of stops. Because anytime when I'm writing the utilization report, I honestly try to look for I really just let the data tell me, but I'm always looking for both sides of it. Okay, is there sign of momentum? What are these things? I could not find anything for the Seahawks. It's terrible. It's it's so bad that I'm not even naming their offensive coordinator anymore. I'm not saying his name. I'm so sick of this guy after how much we pumped him up and talked about, what this offense can be. And I'm sure it's mostly Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll, is he's the granddad, just not
Russ is out of it. Dude, I'm telling you, Russ is forcing a trade out of there this offseason. You know how good I am at this stuff. I'm good at that. Who called the Zach Ertz trade 3 days before it happened? This guy. Well,
Glazer claims that it's for sure happening. So, there's a lot of rumblings around that one. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're right, man. Yeah. And that's your next gig. You need to be the person calling all these trades and stuff.
Right. You know what?
What are you doing? What are you doing with your life? Why are you on a podcast on a Tuesday night?
Because I hurt my hip and I can't strip anymore. So I got to find something else to do. Hey, Dante Pettis had 11 targets on Sunday.
Yeah, man. How about that? An old Matt Waldman #1.
I just saw when I saw Dante Pettis running, I go, Dante Pettis is still in the NFL? Holy shit. Like, what's going on?
You know what's funny? We say this, but let's just hope that this is not us in 3 or 4 years naming Brandon Ayuk. Because I'll tell you what, Pettis was on a similar path to Brandon Ayuk. Remember his rookie year? He closed it out pretty nicely, Drake. And I remember watching a ton of film on him, like just getting open at will, like against these good cornerbacks, like just putting them on skates. And then whatever happened, he just got into Kyle Shanahan's doghouse. Career over.
He's only like 3K on DraftKings this week. So if you want to start him, go ahead.
Yeah, there you go. So, I mean, hey, man, look, I hope for a Dante Pettis. We'll have to see what happens with the rest of the Giants receivers. But yes, I did notice his name. And I thought it was pretty. Look, he garnered some targets, man. His targets per route run,
Targets, he had 11 of them.
Show. Yeah.
They have nobody else.
Yeah. But you know what? You have to be able to get open and do things. We've seen multiple people come out there and get all these routes and not get one target because they suck. So there's still something to Dante Pettis. I'm not saying he's like somebody you got to go get, but like, I'm rooting for the guy because I know he has talent. I don't know what else going on. Maybe there's head games, other things that could be going on with Dante Pettis, but he was out there for 72% of the routes after Kadarius Toney went down, 24% targets per route run. That is super healthy. 22% of the targets on the week, 31% target share on 3rd and 4th down, which tied Sterling Shepard for the week. So when Danny Dimes needed a first down, which they probably didn't get, but if he needed one, he at least thought about Dante Pettis.
He's the worst. I put out a tweet on Sunday, and I put Dante Pettis out as a joke. I didn't think you were really going to break him down, but I put out a tweet.
I don't ever get to talk about Dante Pettis. Sorry.
Which quarterback makes you want to drink bleach more? And the options were Danny Dimes. Oh God, Jared Goff. And then the third one was, no, really, it's Danny Dimes. And Jared Goff won. There were 2 options for Daniel Jones.
It depends on what you're talking. If you're talking fantasy football, I would much rather have Danny Dimes than Jared Goff. If you're talking real life, then
just watching a game and you just watch this person, you go, man, this guy sucks. Like, I don't know. It's close between those two.
It's funny because there's just so much worse than him right now. Like
the Lions.
I thought Daniel Jones was actually playing some of his best football until he got hurt, this season. And then, he lost all of his weapons. And then he came up against the buzzsaw Rams. Shit happens, man. The Giants are not a good team. And what little talent they have was not on the field. But yes, Daniel Jones had a very rough outing. But he's going to be in my top 12 this week. He will be in my top 12.
Dude, I think the ball a lot, man.
He's
in your
5th in the league
this week.
5th in the league in design rushing attempts.
Let's talk about a team that actually does have talent on the field. I want to chat with you about the Bengals pass game. So last year, they threw the ball 34 times a game. Currently, they're throwing it a little more than 20 times a week, which has been fine for Jamar Chase, who's being incredibly efficient with his targets, and he's scoring a ton. Now, I actually did a little digging around PFF Ultimate. Look at me actually using the free software they give us. Among wide receivers with at least 10 targets, so I set the bar low, he's in the top 10 in ADOT. He's in the top 5 in yards per reception. Dwayne, I know you love yards per route run. He's 9th in that too. Here's what I'm worried about. Tyler Boyd, because I roster him in too many leagues, and I'm literally at the point now where I'm ready to drop him. Nate Yonke, a great friend of the show, PFF writer, was writing on Sunday how you should trade for Tyler Boyd. Good things are coming. Brother, I don't see it. Like, I can't get behind keeping Tyler Boyd. Like, I have him on a team. He's like my wide receiver, 5. And, I mean, if he's like your wide receiver 3, you're struggling. And as my wide receiver 5, I'm pretty sure I'm going to cut bait with him tonight and pick up somebody else.
Yeah, it's tough with Boyd because he's eventually going to get his. The problem is when you've had Chase and Higgins out there with him, he's finished wide receiver 74, 34, 68, and 90. So he's clearly been the odd player out, but really so is Higgins. The biggest issue here is not Tyler Boyd. It's an offense that also changed on us, right? Last year, the Bengals were up-tempo, ran a ton of plays, and now we're getting nothing. Now they're running hardly any plays at all. They lean more into the running game, so there's not enough to spread around. As much as I love Jamar Chase, and he's awesome, he's also living on thin margins. I mean, he's living on – it's similar to what we see, but better. It's similar to the Seahawks offense and the way that their volume is handled. Now, over the last 3 weeks, the positive with the Bengals is we've seen them passing slightly more in the neutral situations, and we've seen their pace pick up a little bit. So the hope is they were just letting Joe Burrow get back to health, and now we're going to start to see an offense that's willing to run more plays. But that's what we need in order for all three of these players, to eat. But I do believe that eventually, if they continue on the path they're on, there's going to be weeks where it'll be Jamar Chase that'll be left out, and Tyler Boyd's going to have a decent week, because it just depends on what the defense is going to do. Jamar Chase is the best receiver on the team, and I do expect him to be the most stable, right, of the guys. But Tyler Boyd, we know enough about him to know he's not a complete stiff. So I did downgrade Tyler Boyd, and I'm monitoring it. But I happen to believe that it's going to be more of a rotation of who does the bad week land on, and there's still going to be good weeks for Boyd. That doesn't necessarily help you though, Drake, because it makes it really hard to put him into a fantasy lineup right now. So for the rest of the season right now, I have Jamar Chase as a mid-range to high-end wide receiver 2. I have Higgins as a mid-range to high-end wide receiver 3. I have Tyler Boyd as a wide receiver 4. So, that's where it sits. And the thing is with Boyd, he has to have the volume because he has the low ADOT. It's not like he can just get by like Chase. You could have kind of a low day in targets, but just one of them goes for 50 yards and a touchdown. Okay, great. Your day is saved. Yeah. You don't get that option with Tyler Boyd. Higgins really offers a similar profile to Chase. And Higgins, he had 22% of the targets last week. He was tied with Jamar Chase, but his 2 box scores or PPR ranks of 53 and 53 over the last 2 weeks. So it's the volume in the passing game that's hurting them. But I think Burrow is looking better and better and better. So let's see if the offense continues on. I would rather just get them onto my bench and not be releasing them. I saw Shirley asked about DeAndre Swift and talked about Matt Waldman and Jay Moyer, had a pod where they were down on Swift. And I totally get it. I don't think Swift has looked particularly great, but the thing is, it doesn't really matter, because what are the Lions coaching staff? What do they think? And what do they want to do? And they've told us for 6 weeks straight that the 2-minute offense back is DeAndre Swift. The long down and distance back is DeAndre Swift. Guess what the Lions do? They trail all the time. They trail 75% of their plays by 4 points or more. So Jamal Williams could actually be the better back, but if the coaches don't see him in that role, it doesn't matter. To me right now, Jamal Williams is droppable, because the Lions never play in a type of game where Jamal Williams can be used. Who wants to own the early down back on a team that faces more long down and distance than any other team? Who wants to own the early down or roster the early down back and the goal line back on a team that never gets to be around the goal line? And when they finally do, it's in the 2-minute offense. And guess what? DeAndre Swift gets to be on the field. So as much as Swift may not be good or may be struggling, it doesn't matter, because the Rams have draft capital in him, and they don't care. They've shown us they're going to continue to use him. In fact, every time I hear from the coaches that they want to use DeAndre Swift more. So it's just a situation where I don't disagree with Matt or Jay on the film. What I've seen, and I've watched a lot of Swift. I've seen him do some silly things, but I also see some positive things with him. I don't think he's the most refined runner, but I definitely think he's the better athlete of the two. I definitely think he has more juice out of the two. Do I think he's better between the tackles? No. But the biggest thing I care about is the utilization. What are the coaches telling me about their roles? And it's not just who's getting carries or who's getting snaps. It's who's being used. And that's why I break it down into these roles, because it's just so much more actionable and so much more helpful. It would be different if the team didn't trust him at all in the 2-minute offense. But just the way this season is going, Swift is by far the back that I want to own in Detroit. Do I think that he's going to, finish as a top 6 back? He's got a lot of competition. There's some really good backs this year, but I think DeAndre Swift is a top 12 back.
So you guys are listening to the Fantasy Football Hustle here. I'm Brian Drake, Dwain McFarland. Follow us on Twitter. I'm at Drake Fantasy. Dwain, of course, is at Dwain McFarland. He's got 100 million followers now. He's passed Matthew Berry, Evan Silva. He is now the king of fantasy with his new role. And I am a measly 4,000 followers. But anybody, if you ask me a question on Twitter, I will respond to you. We'll hang out, we'll have fun. I'll send you a picture of a dog, whatever you want to do. And also head over to ViridianGlobal.com. Get some hustle swag, man. Dwain and I have some really cool shirts, hats. I just bought a zip up jacket you can wear to the gym and stuff. It's pretty sweet. It's the pin tweet at FF Hustle. Go buy some cool stuff. So here's another guy I want to talk to you about, and you made him the first name in the utilization report. And if you go to pff.com, use promo code HUSTLE. Hundreds of you have, and trust me, the guys at PFF know it because we reminded them of it today. And it's Rashad Bateman. He made his debut for the Ravens, and while the fantasy numbers didn't jump off the screen, his usage did. Hollywood Brown dropped yet another touchdown off his fingertips. Mark Andrews finished as the tight end 4 on the week. But you really did take notice of Bateman's playing time and usage. So let's talk about this offense and these wide receivers.
Sure. You had Sammy Watkins out, number one, with a hamstring injury. And so we'll have to see, what the injury report says on him. But I was just impressed with Bateman. He got out there for 67% of the routes. That's not enough. You want to be above that. But this was his first game back. And in that, on those 67% of routes, he had 27% targets per route run, 24% of the team targets, 23% of the air yards, 29% of the third and fourth down targets. 43% went to Marquis Brown. So he was second to Brown in third and fourth down targets. He tied for the lead in targets on the game with Mark Andrews. And from a targets per route run, he was actually first on the team, edging out Mark Andrews by 1% this past weekend. And so I just think that's a positive. I don't think Rashad Bateman is going to lead this team in passing, receptions and targets for the season. But what I do know is that the Ravens are willing to throw more than ever. They're probably going to throw about 10% more than they did last year. They're more willing to throw in every single game situation. They don't care if they're leading, if they're tied, if they're trailing. And this last week, you actually had them leading by 10 or more points. I want to say it was on 70% of the snaps. So they ran 21 personnel. So that's a fullback, right? A tight end and a running back and 2 receivers on 40% of their plays. By far the most that they've run 21 personnel this year, because at the end of the game, they were just trying to get this thing over. Like if you go look at the utilization report, you'll see like all the receivers' routes were down some. And it's because they were using 21 in the game because they were just, they were blowing the Chargers out and they just wanted the game to be over. But I was encouraged with Bateman, Drake. Again, he could still be in a committee with Sammy Watkins. I know the big question I get is, well, what about Marquis Brown? Is he going to take Marquis Brown's routes away? I don't think so. Marquis Brown still led the team in routes. I think they play 2 different roles. I think Bateman is going to take over Sammy Watkins' role. I can't tell you for sure, though, if once Watkins is back, that they won't rotate. And it could make Bateman completely worthless from a season-long standpoint for 2021. But I think he flashed enough in this game, Drake, that you just you got to roll the dice on it. We only get so many times a year where you get a young talent that's got first round draft capital that's in a situation that looks good. The Ravens offense is starting to click. I know they've got some offensive line issues. I still think the Ravens are a bit overrated right now, but I think that Lamar Jackson is growing. I think the passing game is growing, and some of it is forced because they don't really have any running backs. So they're just like, okay, well, let's just throw the ball more. It's a perfect storm of all these things coming together that equals a bigger passing pie, right? And now you've got this young player potentially coming into a role where he could rotate in and out of the second and third target. And I think he could be usable down the stretch. And again, you want these types of players on your roster, Drake, because even though maybe next week or the next week you can't use Bateman, what if Marquis Brown, he's had a lot of injuries. What if he goes down in 3 weeks? What if Mark Andrews gets hurt? Who's going to be the most likely person to fulfill Mark Andrews' targets in the middle of the field? My bet would be Rashad Bateman. So there's a lot of ways for Bateman to potentially find value, over spurts of different games, not just as the third receiver in this pecking order, where he may be the second some week and even have some weeks where he's the first. But I think there's other opportunities that if any other things happen to the offense, Bateman's role could even grow more. And at that point, then you could really be sitting on a gold mine.
Rapid fire. Who'd you rather have, Rashad Bateman or Tyler Boyd?
Tyler Boyd.
Oh, look at you. I didn't think that was going to be the answer. All right.
Well, I just see that the Bengals offense is growing and we know what Tyler Boyd is, but it is close. It's closer than you would think it should be.
All right, the Eagles traded Zach Ertz to Arizona on Friday in a move I called on Monday. You can check the Twitter feed because I victory lapped it. And this could change the dynamic for both offenses. First, the Eagles could go even more 11 personnel, and they run the 6 most plays from 11 personnel, by the way. I had to look this up. There's a narrative that the Eagles run a ton of 12 personnel. They only run the 18th most 12 personnel in the league. This is going to open up things for Quez Watkins and Dallas Goedert, who, by the way, still on the COVID list. So a guy named Jack Stoll could be the tight end for the Eagles this week. Hashtag yikes. But this offense is a train wreck. It's much like when Tim Tebow played in Denver. Don't watch it. Just look for the final numbers. So quick gaze to you about this Eagles offense. It's just ugly, man. I mean, they're running RPOs every play. Nothing's from under center. Receivers are blocking when they should be running routes. Hurts is not accurate with the football, but at the end of the day, if you got Hurts, he's going to give you numbers. Everybody else, light a candle, say a prayer.
The thing is, I don't really care because the Eagles are behind all the time and they are pass heavy in all game strips. So I just want the passing weapons for the Eagles. And I know that I'm going to have to deal with ups and downs, but I want Devonta Smith on my fantasy roster and I want Dallas Goedert on my fantasy roster. And I think we can light a little candle for Jalen Reagor because of the things that you just said. Yeah, they don't run a ton of 12 personnel, but 21% of their plays, 25% of their plays, 27% of their plays. That's a lot. I expect that number to be down around 10% now. Unless they're leading in a game and just trying to run the football, right? That's going to be the only reason the Eagles are going to use 12 personnel anymore. It's going to be all 11. So I expect their 11 personnel, which has been in the mid 70s, to be up around 80, 85% now. And so that's going to do a little bit whenever you think about the role for Jalen Reagor, who he had mostly just been on the field in 11 personnel. So yeah, I think Dallas Goedert is a top 7 tight end the rest of the way. Historically, Drake, his targets per route run have been right at 20%, even as a young player. And there's not a lot of young players to hit that 20% mark. And if I gave you the list of the ones that do, they're pretty impressive. And so he's already gotten to that. He's just never had enough routes. So now he's going to get the other part of the equation. I think Dallas Goedert is an absolute buy low right now. If you can get him, if he's on your wire, he should be on your team. I just said he's in the top 7. So basically, if you don't have Kelsey, if you don't have Waller, if you don't have Pitts, if you don't have Hawkinson, and if you don't have and Noah Fant could just be short term until Albert Okwuegbunam is back. But right now,
you with the pronunciation,
Albert Okwuegbunam. He fits in the top 7 right now. Noah Fant does because of Albert O being out, and then the other, I'm missing one. Drake, I missed one tight end there. Anyway, you get the picture.
Yeah, like Ricky Seals-Jones.
Yeah, Dallas Goedert is up there. And so he's right in that group of who we'll be considering. I put him in the second tier, basically. You've got your very top tier, and then you've got that next. Oh, Kittle, because Kittle's hurt. That's the name that I didn't
Kittle,
get.
Mark Andrews.
So Kittle.
Dalton Schultz.
Mark Andrews is in the top 2. No, Dalton Schultz doesn't belong in the group.
No, you don't like him? How about Mike Gesicki?
Neither one of those are in that conversation. They're the next tier down because they're not out there on enough routes. I mean, if you go look at Gesicki, it is good. He's around 70% every week, which we used to have to deal with these 50%ers, these 60%ers. So he's at least out there 70%. A little worried about him as the offense gets healthy, but I do have Gesicki in my top 10, and it's been a long time since I've done that. Gesicki's one of those players. It's hard for me to give in my trust, Drake, because every time I do, I put him in the circle of trust. What does he do? He lets me down. So I have to be careful with him. Dalton Schultz, like him, in my top 12 right now, but barely, like hanging on by a thread. His routes are still down in the mid 60s, and they've been moving down. You're going to get Michael Gallup back. You're going to see more 11 personnel. And the thing that keeps Dalton Schultz, I think really part of games is whenever the Cowboys are leading, they love to use 12 personnel. And so then they play under center. They've got these little boot action fakes, and Dalton Schultz a big part of those. And so he gets some design looks out of that. So I do think, he'll still remain viable, but he doesn't have the upside that the other guys that we just talked about. Those are all guys that have far more target upside, each week. The Cowboys offense is really good. So that helps, Schultz as well. They're a top 5 offense in the league, and some of these other teams we're talking about are not. So, there's a lot of things that come together. But if I'm talking about repeatability, I like Schultz, but he doesn't belong in the groups that we talked about.
Talking about targets in Arizona, where Zach Ertz is going, we finally saw signs of life for DeAndre Hopkins. So now Ertz comes to this offense. They simply just don't throw to the tight end there. That's just not something they do. So we'll see if he's used as like a slot wide receiver, but that's where Rondale Moore is. And, you're getting these up and down weeks from Christian Kirk. And is it crazy to think AJ Green is viable again after 2 of 3 weeks finishing in the top 20 of PPR wide receivers. I mean, AJ Green's available in 55% of Yahoo leagues. I mean, it kind of feels like he should be owned. So a quick overview of the Cardinals offense.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that's holding the Cardinals offense back, right, and making it more of this hit or miss thing is just they don't have to run a lot of plays and a lot of passing plays either because they lead all the damn time. So they're in leading scripts like as much as anyone. And I mean, I grade them really as, they're a pass balance team, but they look like a run heavy team right now. But they're ninth in neutral first down pass rate, so they pass 56% of the time when they're on first down in a game within 3 points in regulation play, right? So that's actually good. So we know that their underlying tendencies show that they are willing to pass the ball in different situations, but they just haven't had to because they're winning all the time. So that's what we need for Arizona, for us to get some really big games out of the receivers. You're going to get a big game this weekend out of James Conner. He'll probably be in my top 12.
Mm-hmm.
They're like 17.5 point favorites this weekend against Houston. So, I mean, James Conner could be running. I mean, he may run every play in the fourth quarter of this game with Chase Edmonds nursing, that shoulder injury. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But as far as Hopkins goes, AJ Green goes, yeah, they're all out there enough. Hopkins still is, the number one guy. If you look at him on the year, 20% of the targets, 18% to AJ Green, 17% to Christian Kirk, 16% to Rondale Moore. But we had 2 weeks where DeAndre Hopkins didn't really do a lot because he had the rib injury. If you look at him over the last several weeks, and this last week even, it shows 12% targets, but he had 4 targets wiped off the board by plays that were called back. He didn't catch those balls, but they were targets. So he would have had, I think in the box score, it showed 3. He really had 7 targets, which would have put his target share this past week up into the 20s. The week before, 24%. The week before that, 32%. So DeAndre Hopkins is going to be fine, living off of thin margins right now, but mainly just because Arizona is so successful. AJ Green, wide receiver 4 to me. I still prefer Christian Kirk over AJ Green, and the reason why is I just like the blow-up weeks that I get with Kirk, but AJ Green's right there, and Kirk's just a younger player, gets to play inside from the slot. And Kirk, I have actually graded as a boom bust wide receiver 4 versus a low end wide receiver 3 for Green, but I like the boom that I get from Kirk. I don't like the bust, but a lot of times it does depend on my matchups. I'm looking at what do I need in a particular week, depending on who I'm playing against. Do I need that upside? And I just don't have AJ Green, to be honest, on a ton of rosters. I'm never making the decision between the 2 of them.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, let's go.
Zach Ertz.
Zach Ertz. What do you think he's going to do in the desert?
Look, I don't see Zach Ertz really coming in there and demanding that much, Drake. I mean, you can tell me. I mean, listen, you've got all these other weapons. Like
he doesn't block.
DeAndre Hopkins is above Zach Ertz. I would put Christian Kirk above Zach Ertz. Rondale Moore, I mean, he's probably going to get more targets than Rondale Moore, or somewhere around the same amount. But I mean, I'm not going to take targets away from Rondale Moore to give them to Zach Ertz. And then AJ Green, he's kind of like Zach Ertz. He's like, the older statesman, in the group. But Max Williams was not ever running 70, 80% of the routes. And guess what? Zach Ertz isn't either, because this team runs the most 10 personnel in the league. So they run the most 12 or near the most 12, and they run the most 10. And it's funny, they don't run as much 11, but when you're running 10, right, you're getting 3 receivers onto the field. So I don't see a clear path for Zach Ertz to even get to 70% of the routes. I think he's going to be more in the 60 to 65% range. I think he'll have some nice weeks. I think he's a mid-range tight end 2 that's going to give you some tight end 1 weeks. But Zach Ertz isn't someone that, honestly, I'm super excited about. It's not a great landing spot for tight ends, in my opinion.
All right, folks, we know there's a lot of options out there in terms of fantasy podcasts. We're very glad you choose ours. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Subscribe to that YouTube channel. We're going to do some rapid fire here before we let Dwain go. I know he's a little under the weather. Dwain, who do I drop for a defense? Allen Robinson, Corey Davis, Rashad Bateman, or T.Y. Hilton?
T.Y. Hilton. He's got an injured quad right now. We don't know if he's even going to play. I know they're saying it should be okay, but I would easily drop T.Y.
All right. Let me see. Find a little more here. As always, folks. All right. Here's an FFPC Dynasty 1 quarterback league. Would you take Calvin Ridley, for Waddle and Pollard? He's got, there's more
Waddle,
stuff.
I would.
So there you go. Got offered Aaron Jones for Darrell Henderson. Got offered Aaron Jones and Darrell Henderson for Derrick Henry. What do you guys think? I'm sticking with Aaron Jones and Darrell Henderson.
Man, yeah. So you're going to get Derrick Henry coming to you?
Yeah. And you got to give up Darrell Henderson and Aaron Jones.
Jeez, it's amazing to think Derrick Henry would ever be available. But I agree. I mean, it's two near every down backs for one. And as great as King Henry is, I don't think I can give away two players. Now, it's your roster. I know it's rapid fire, right? I do this crap and I screw us every time.
Right.
But it's a situation where if you're only starting one of those two players anyway, and now you get to add Henry to be your one player in your lineup, I would do the deal then. Now, if you're starting both of those players every week and you're going to have a hole in your lineup, then I wouldn't do the deal.
All right. Amy DeLisa is asking if we can discuss the outlook for Jalen Waddle with Tua.
Yeah, so it's actually a positive when you look at Tua with Jalen Waddle over the last. They've really only played 2 games together, but I just looked at it from the. Ran it by the season. But if you look at the ADOT for Jalen Waddle with Tua versus Jacoby Brissett, 9.1 with Tua versus only 3.8 for Brissett. I really like what they're doing with Waddle, Drake. They're moving him all over the field. 19% of his receptions are coming off of motion at the snap. That's the second most in the league, only behind Chris Godwin. So they're really scheming him up. We just need him to work further down the field. I mean, the guy, for those weeks with Jacoby Brissett, as much as he peppered him in some of those, 1 week, he had 7% of the air yards, 14% of the air yards. Last week, you get Tua back and your air yards jump up to 32%. Play action targets jump to 46%. You get the PPR rank number 4 overall. So, I like Jalen Waddle. They've got to find ways to get him into more space. They've got to find ways to let him use his speed to really stretch the defense, not just throw him 2-yard drag routes. This guy's not Laviska Shenault. He can do a lot more.
Start Mecole Hardman or Robbie Anderson?
Robbie Anderson.
All right. Here's an interesting one from Justin Masters. Is there a team that scares you that nobody's thinking about?
As far as they're going to get hot?
I don't know what he's thinking here. I'll tell you mine after yours, but
if there's a team that scares me that I think could get hot, I honestly think that you could still see the Panthers have lost. They started off hot and then they've cooled off, but they have a defense. They've got multiple weapons on offense. I like the coaching staff. I like a lot of the decisions they make from, how they run, the offense. So that would be one team that, and more from a fantasy perspective, where I just really feel like, they're going to be able to support multiple weapons. I'm just trying to think of a team right now in the NFL that's not playing well. I mean, the Chiefs would always be in that conversation because you have Patrick Mahomes. But I'm just thinking there's not one that's jumping off, to me, Drake. So if you've got one that you think's
Indianapolis. Nah. Well, here's the thing. Here's why I think of Indianapolis. I need them to play just well enough where Carson Wentz gets 75% of the snaps so we get their first round pick. But I don't want him to get too good where that's a top 10 pick right now. But I don't want him to get hurt or just to be abysmal where they bench him. But they're an interesting
Aaron Martinez
team.
has a good one. 49ers. The 49ers could always get hot. I think they've just got to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. They'll eventually get, Kittle back. So we'll see what they look like off their bye. But I would never doubt the 49ers. They could always be a team that could get rolling.
Here's an interesting one. Pick up Ernest Johnson and play him over Damian Williams. We don't know if Damian Williams is playing this week with COVID, but let's say they're both available. Because we got Khalil Herbert who had a great week.
Yeah, I would play Ernest Johnson. I think I downgraded Damian Williams. Even if he plays this week, I think he's more back to his other role. Khalil Herbert looked good. I think Khalil Herbert's going to play more of the David Montgomery role now, and you're going to have Damian Williams playing the Damian Williams role. I think he'll pick up a little more work than what he was getting with Montgomery, but I thought Herbert played really well. I think Herbert may have played well enough, honestly, Drake, that maybe he deserves even a little bit whenever you get David Montgomery back.
Yeah, he's a good player, and that's why, folks, you're always grinding the waiver wire. You're always adding speculative running backs. Yeah, that's why I tweeted out this week. You don't need to be carrying backup defenses, backup quarterbacks, backup tight ends. It should all be flyer running backs. But hey, it is what it is. So, folks, thanks for hanging out with us. Dwayne's got a nice vacation. He's taken his lovely bride on a trip to Nashville. So enjoy yourself, my friend. And we'll see you back here next week. Remember, folks, to never get out hustled. We'll see you.